Dricus Du Plessis can beat Khamzat Chimaev if he learned this one thing from Gilbert Burns. I'm just kidding. Of course, it's not one thing. However, there are a lot of lessons that you can learn from the fight between Gilbert Burns and Khamzat, and also from what happened in the fight between Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev. And I know I said in my last video that I wasn't familiar enough with these two guys, and since Khamzat is undefeated and he's bigger and he looks like an absolute wrecking machine, and he's the favorite despite being the challenger who just came up a weight class, I would probably just go with him. But after looking into it and watching some tape on both fighters, I actually think Dricus Du Plessis has a better chance than the odds makers are giving him. And I think if he can beat Khamzat, he might have discovered the blueprint for dealing with this hard-nosed wrestling approach that Khamzat has had so much success with, that Khabib had so much success with, and Du Plessis may have discovered, or rediscovered, if you will, the blueprint for a full-fledged mixed martial arts approach to fighting, which has been used by other champions before him. Welcome to My Fitness Fight, the channel where we use our cunning and stealth to battle our demons and share memes and chase dreams along the way. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and always stay fighting fit and ready to follow Big John's advice. Protect yourself at all times. I started looking into UFC 319, in particular the main event between Dricus Du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev, a little bit closer, and I think I just mispronounced Chimaev's name, which is what I was about to talk about. I was also mispronouncing Du Plessis' name in the last video, and that is something that you can expect from me. Even though I understand language quite well and I'm actually bilingual, I manage to mispronounce almost everything that I say. So I apologize for that. And let's get into an analysis of Khamzat versus DDP, and I'll talk about why and how I think Dricus can beat Khamzat. Now, I saw a clip from an interview that Dricus did leading up to this fight, where he was saying that everyone's always talking about what a great wrestler Khamzat is and how he's going to deal with that, but he thinks that he's the best mixed martial artist, and he's going to show that he's the best fighter. And that's kind of a boilerplate answer for a champion to give, but at the same time, I think that it's correct, but it's also not a complete answer. And of course, he's not going to give the complete answer because he doesn't want to give everything away to his opponent. And I find this fight so interesting because on the one hand, I understand why the odds makers are favoring Khamzat, because despite having come up a weight class and despite being the challenger, he is the bigger guy, and he's been so dominant and he's undefeated. But Dricus is the defending champion, and I noticed that there's a significant difference between the age and or the MMA age of DDP and Khamzat's other recent opponents. And let me explain what I mean by that. Now, what I mean by age is obvious. In terms of linear age, Khamzat has been younger than all of his recent opponents and significantly younger than many of them. When I say MMA age, I mean how many fights in total has he endured and how many years in total has he been fighting at a professional level. Now, Khamzat, according to Sherdog, Khamzat started fighting professionally in 2018, but he had 3 amateur fights in 2017 and 2018, and I'm guessing that these were probably pretty tough fights. A lot of people look at his record and try to call him a can crusher or say that he hasn't faced real competition, and I don't think that either of those things is true. As far as I can see, he's had a reasonably difficult path in his career, and he has fought extremely high caliber competition, such as Robert Whittaker at middleweight after coming up from welterweight, where he defeated Kamaru Usman, Kevin Holland, and Gilbert Burns. And the Gilbert Burns fight was the one which most people felt was the closest, and there were several occasions in that fight where Burns had him hurt, where it looked bad for Khamzat. There was also several occasions where Khamzat had Burns hurt. It was just a great fight overall. I really enjoyed rewatching that. And so a big part of what I'm going to talk about in this video is what Burns did strategically, and I think that he specifically practiced doing this because almost every time that they got into punching distance, Burns threw either a jab, a straight right, a 1-2, or a leg kick. It seems very likely that when they were preparing for this fight, they drilled to get him used to never letting anyone stand in front of him like that. And if Dricus Du Plessis brings a similar, but hopefully even better strategy to the octagon, I think he can beat Khamzat, because Dricus Du Plessis has a very similar build to Gilbert Burns. but he's 2 inches taller. He's 6 feet tall and fights at middleweight, 185. Gilbert Burns, on the other hand, is 5'10". He fights at welterweight, 170, and has in the past fought at lightweight, which is 155. And when you look at Gilbert Burns and Dricus, they both have this kind of mesomorph body type, which Georges St. Pierre also had. Now, Georges St. Pierre is also, I think, 5'10", or maybe even 5'9". And keep in mind, Khamzat is still significantly bigger. He's 6'2". It's kind of crazy that he was fighting at welterweight because he is a natural middleweight and he's a tall middleweight. However, according to UFC's own stats, Dricus Du Plessis is actually longer in reach with both his arms and his legs. He has a 76-inch arm reach and a 43-inch leg reach. I have no idea how they're measuring that because it doesn't make sense that arms, maybe they're measuring from the center of your torso to your fist for arms and your inseam for legs or something. I don't understand that, but that's what it says. Whereas Khamzat's arm reach is an inch shorter and his leg reach is 3 inches shorter. And if Dricus has even a small reach advantage, that's going to be really valuable and really helpful for him in executing the same type of strategy that Gilbert Burns had success with, even though he's so much smaller. But again, I don't think it's just about the size. I think we need to consider the amount of previous damage most of Khamzat's previous high-caliber opponents had endured. According to SureDog, Khamzat started his professional career in 2018. In 2018, Robert Whittaker fought Yoel Romero for the second time. In 2018, Kamaru Usman had 3 fights, 2 of which were against Rafael dos Anjos and Demian Maia. In 2018, Kevin Holland, who is the only fighter on this list who isn't at least 5 years older than Khamzat, Kevin Holland in 2018 had already been fighting professionally for 6 years, and in 2018 he fought 5 times, including a loss inside the UFC to Thiago Santos. And in 2018, Gilbert Burns fought 3 times in the UFC, including a win over Olivier Aubin-Mercier and a loss via KO to Dan Hooker. Again, this is the same year that Khamzat started his professional career. All of these guys were already fighting high-caliber opponents, most of them in the UFC. Most of them had already been fighting professionally for years, and most of them were 5 years or more older than Khamzat, which, when you're in your early 30s, 5 years makes quite a bit of a difference in terms of the amount of existing injuries you may have, especially as a professional fighter. A lot of people in the fight business will say that it's extremely rare, if not impossible, for 2 high-level combat athletes to step into the ring or the cage and both of them not have any outstanding injuries. These guys always have current injuries and old injuries that may be acting up. Of course, they're going to say that they're perfectly healthy because they want their opponent to think that they're perfectly healthy. They don't want anyone to know if there's anything wrong with them, if they have any weaknesses. And the older you are and the more previous fights you've had, the more likely you are to have some sort of a pre-existing injury that's going to slow you down or trip you up. Now, unlike the others, Dricus is the same age as Khamzat at 31, born in 1994, and he does have significantly more fights than Khamzat. Khamzat is undefeated with 14 wins and 0 losses, whereas Dricus has fought 25 times professionally with 23 wins and 2 losses. But most of Khamzat's previous opponents, like Gilbert Burns, in addition to being older than him, had 30 fights or more already. Dricus, on the other hand, with 23 wins and 2 losses under his belt, isn't just the champion. I would say he is in the prime of his career. He's basically in his prime age. It's possible he might have had a slightly higher level of fitness when he was a bit younger, but he would not have had the same level of experience as he does now. And that is why I think that experience will actually be a factor in his favor, because while Khamzat has fought some very high-level competition recently, he does not have nearly as much high-level competition as DDP has. All right, let's take a quick look at what Gilbert Burns did in his fight against Khamzat that worked so well on the feet. He also had some strategies for when things went into the grappling domain, which we'll get into later. And there were a couple of occasions, including right near the beginning of the fight, where Gilbert didn't implement this strategy perfectly, which is understandable. It's difficult to implement a strategy perfectly when you're being punched in the face, but throughout most of the fight, Burns would not let Khamzat enter punching distance without either throwing something or faking like he was going to throw something. This, in my opinion, is the main thing that Gilbert Burns did that allowed him to be as successful as he was against Khamzat. And it's the main thing that Bobby Knuckles failed to do that allowed Khamzat to get in on him. And I do think that that submission on Robert Whittaker was an unlikely occurrence. I'm not saying that Khamzat didn't do it intentionally. He probably did, but it's the kind of thing that isn't going to work every time. But what Burns is doing, you can see here that there is probably at least a foot, like 12 inches or maybe 18 inches, maybe even more of space between Burns's front foot and Khamzat's front foot. So right now, they're outside of punching distance. Neither of them can realistically punch the other from there without moving their feet. Neither of them can realistically grab the other from there without moving their feet. And certainly neither of them can try to take the other down without moving their feet. They might be able to throw a kick from there that would land, but they're even a little bit far away for kicking distance. And this is at 113. Now here, a second later, actually I think it's a little bit less than a second later, in this case, Gilbert Burns actually moved forward and engaged, but if Khamzat had been the one to move forward, the result would have been the same. Now, they're close enough together that one of them could punch the other or go for a takedown or something like that, and so Burns is punching Khamzat. He throws a nice 1-2 here, and then he's right back to having reaction space between them. And what I mean by reaction space is when someone is close enough that they can hit you with a round punch or grab a hold of you and go for a takedown, they're basically close enough that they can touch you without you really having time to react to it. Like if someone is that close, you can't rely on your hand speed or your head movement speed being enough to protect you. You have to really be ready. And it's that failure that led to Robert Whittaker's defeat. But the main thing to focus on here is that out here, Gilbert Burns is safe because if Khamzat buries his head and runs for a double leg at this distance, Burns has enough space to either circle away or sprawl or throw a knee or a punch and get out of there. As soon as they are this close together, Burns is either attacking or he's circling out to create more space. Again, there are a few times in the fight where he doesn't quite do this, including one right near the beginning, but Burns also had a really good strategy on the ground, which was to just try to escape instead of trying to fight in the guard. Okay, Gilbert Burns is a third-degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but as far as I can remember, he never tried to play guard or go for sweeps or submissions or anything like that. Anytime that he got taken down, he was throwing hammer fists from the bottom, he was trying to do up kicks, he was trying to get his feet on the hips and push him away, anything to stand up. Because even though he's a third-degree black belt, he knows that if he spends too much time on the ground with this guy, he's going to get crushed. And that is something that a black belt understands, because at 5'10", I can guarantee you Gilbert Burns is in the gym all the time with guys who are bigger than him, because I'm 5'11", and when I was practicing MMA in a small-town gym, even though I'm 5'11", and it was a small-town gym, I was usually the smallest guy in the gym. So I can guarantee you that Gilbert Burns is rolling with bigger guys every day, and he knows you can't hang out on the ground with someone who's that big and that strong and that good. And that's why every time Khamzat gets close, he's throwing something, and that is really why it was such an exciting fight. A lot of people were saying that Khamzat is a boring fighter before this fight, and then they were like, this was amazing, it was epic, they were both going back and forth, there were so many knockdowns, all this crazy stuff, and it's very simple. It's because Gilbert Burns was not giving Khamzat the time or the space he needed to set up a takedown. Now let's look at Robert Whittaker. Right here, we're at 450 in round one, right at the beginning of the fight. Khamzat's right foot is almost in the center of the octagon. It's a little above the center of the octagon there, but you can see he's standing right in the center of the Monster Energy drink can. Bobby Knuckles, on the other hand, has got his right foot just about touching the inner octagon line, and because of the angle, it's hard to see, but it looks like there's maybe an inch or two in between their feet. So this is already too close. This is already space where Bobby Knuckles should not be hanging out. When he's this close to Khamzat, he should either be attacking or circling out or some combination thereof. Just keep in mind that we're at 450. Khamzat has a foot in the middle of the energy drink can. Whittaker has a foot on the inner octagon line. And they're both in pretty wide stances right now, so it looks like they're a bit closer together than they really are. but they're still just about in that danger zone. Now we're at 449. This is about 1 second later, and they've both basically closed their stance. So their back foot has come a little bit closer to their front foot. They're both standing up a little bit straighter, although Whittaker is still pretty low and still pretty spread out. But you can see that Khamzat's foot is now at the edge of the energy drink can instead of at the middle. Now we're at 448. This is about 2 seconds after the first screenshot, and they're in more or less the same position as the last one. Khamzat's maybe a little bit further forward, and Whittaker has spread his stance back out. So basically, for the past 2 or 3 seconds, they've been pretty much right in front of each other, a half step away from punching range, and Whittaker is just kind of sitting there with his base spread out and kind of crouched down, which is not how you want to be if you want to be mobile. And again, if he's going to sit here for 2, 3, 4 seconds, he should really be attacking and getting out, or just getting out and looking for a better position. Because what Khamzat does here is basically he's kind of edged his way forward from where he was standing almost in the center of the octagon to now he's just like half a step away from punching distance. And what he does here is he stands up really straight and he kind of puts his hands up like he's going to box. And then a second later at 447, he has started to go for his takedown. You can see that just a second ago at 448, he was very upright with his hands up very high. He was kind of faking like he was going to start striking. And then at 447, he's jumped into what is basically a runner's stance. And from here, he's just going to drop his head and run right through Bobby Knuckles. So here we are at 447. Here we are still at 447. And you can see in this split second, Whittaker has reacted to this and he's moved back a tiny bit. His foot is now outside of the inner octagon line, and Khamzat is barely off the energy drink can, but they're very obviously in punching distance now, and their feet are more than parallel. If they were directly in front of each other, their feet would be overlapping. Okay, so that's how quickly you can go from not being close enough to reach out and grab someone to being close enough to reach out and grab someone. If Khamzat had done what he's doing right now about 2 seconds earlier, he would have been too far away, and Bobby Knuckles probably would have had more time to react to it. But again, here we are at 447. Here we are still at 447. Here we are still at 447. And here we are at 446. So in 1 second, he went from basically upright with his hands up high, looking like he was going to strike, to completely parallel to the ground, deep in on this takedown. And he's got both hands wrapped. He's smashing into Bobby Knuckles' solar plexus with his head. And from this point forward, Whittaker never really escaped from him. He was defending from this point onward in the fight. And I do really think that if Whittaker had managed to employ a more similar strategy to Burns, there is a very good chance that he could have won, because he's also a much bigger guy. Then again, he's also an older guy and a much more worn guy, a guy with a much longer fight history with many wars in it. So maybe, for example, he has had his jaw dislocated before, and that's why it became dislocated easily when this crank was applied. Anyways, when I was initially looking at this fight on the surface, I was agreeing with the odds makers, but after I looked into it more, I actually think that this would be a solid underdog bet. Again, I'm not betting, I just kind of like looking at the odds, and I find it interesting to compare my perspective to the bookmakers' perspective. And while I do understand why they stacked the odds the way they did, I think that Dricus may very well have the formula here, because when you put together his youth and his experience and his skill set and his size, I think that if he can employ a similar strategy to Gilbert Burns, then he's going to be able to give Khamzat problems that he has never really experienced before in his career. And that could potentially lead to one of the most interesting fights in a long time, and I will absolutely be there for it. So I already thought this was a really cool matchup, and I was looking forward to it, but now I am really, really excited for this fight. Let me know your thoughts on this fight in the comment section below. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think I'm right? Who do you think is going to win this bout? Like the video and subscribe to the channel so that you can come back and watch the next one.